Hello, namaskar. This is Firstpost and you're watching Vantage with me, Palki Sharma. Today's top story is Vladimir Putin. The Western press has had some very colorful headlines about him in the last few years. Every once in a while, they talk about some disease that will spell the end of the Russian president. But look at him today, holding a marathon press conference in Moscow that has stretched beyond 4 hours. Even if it is staged, which it most likely is, it takes stamina to sit through 4 hours of talking and taking calls. We'll tell you what he said and what's his offer to Donald Trump. Meanwhile, in West Asia, it's business as usual, more war. At this rate, maybe a new front. Israel has bombed Yemen. In Iran, there's an energy crisis. This is a country that has among the largest known oil reserves in the world, but they don't have supplies to light up streets and heat their homes. Coupled with the economy and the security situation in the neighborhood, could this lead to the fall of the regime? India's inflation is set to get worse, and it will have an impact on growth. We'll bring you the numbers. China is building nukes at breakneck speed and America is worried. Panunus has released a new video, both funny and dangerous. Why are the Khalistanis targeting Russia? We'll discuss that. Why the US has sanctioned Pakistan over its missile program. Why India's market regulator has cracked the whip on financial influencers. The verdict in France's mass rape trial. And how Turkey became the hair transplant capital of the world. All this and more coming up. The headlines first. A Georgian lawmaker is shot dead inside the parliament. The incident took place in the Russia-backed breakaway region of Abkhazia. Another lawmaker has been identified as a suspect in the shooting. Last month, Abkhazia was shaken by rare demonstrations. The flashpoint was a deal that would boost Russian investment in the region. Bangladesh's Mohammad Yunus says he has agreed to strengthen relations with Pakistan. It comes after the Bangladeshi interim leader met Pakistan's Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif in Cairo. The move will further test the Yunus government's frosty relations with India. Dhaka's ties with New Delhi have frayed since the ouster of Sheikh Hasina in August. Egypt hosts the leaders of Turkey and Iran. This is the first meeting between the two leaders since the fall of Syria's Bashar al-Assad. Historically, Ankara has backed the opposition to Assad, while Tehran supported his rule. New Zealand sinks into recession. In the third quarter, its economy suffered an unexpectedly sharp slump. It sent the country's currency tumbling. New Zealand's finance minister says the economy has now contracted for 8 quarters, but she expects growth in 2025. And India will play the Champions Trophy matches on neutral ground and not in Pakistan. The announcement ends a month-long standoff. India had refused to travel to Pakistan over security concerns. The tournament will begin in February next year.
Политика и есть искусство компромисса. Всеми странами региона. Избранным президентом Трампу, когда мы с ним встретились. Ну, во-первых, я не знаю. И повторяю в сотый раз.
What's your New Year tradition? Maybe a holiday or a family dinner or some year-end shopping. But if you're Vladimir Putin, it's none of that. It's a marathon press conference in Moscow. Today's press conference lasted 4 hours and 31 minutes. The Russian president organizes it every December. He takes questions from journalists, even speaks to Russian citizens on the phone. I know 4.5 hours sounds like a lot, but Putin's record is 4 hours and 47 minutes, a time he set back in 2013. This year, around 2 million questions were submitted in advance. Of course, most of it is likely choreographed by the Kremlin, but it does reveal Putin's thought process, a sneak peek into what he thinks of the world As always, no topic was left out. The war in Ukraine, the fall of Bashar al-Assad in Syria, the election of Donald Trump in the US, the state of Russia's economy, all of this was covered by Putin in the press conference. On Ukraine, his confidence was evident. Putin knows that Donald Trump will put pressure on Ukraine, maybe even cut off military aid to Kiev. He said he's ready to meet Donald Trump anytime. He also said that he's open to a deal.
I haven't spoken to Donald Trump for more than 4 years, and I am ready for it, of course, at any time, and I will be ready for a meeting if he wants it. Politics is the art of compromise. And we have always said that we are ready for both negotiations and compromises. It is just that the opposite side in the literal and figurative sense of the word refused to negotiate.
So Putin is ready to talk anytime, any place. But he has a precondition for a deal. Putin says that Ukraine must hold elections again. He will only negotiate with the winner of that election, and he is fine even if Volodymyr Zelensky wins again. Speaking of whom, Zelensky was in Brussels today. He met the leaders of France, Germany and NATO. In all these meetings, one thing was quite clear. Ukraine's future will not be decided on the battlefield. It will be decided on the negotiating table. So the goalpost has shifted. Europe is trying to bolster Kiev's position before the talks begin. Zelensky says he's hoping for security guarantees.
Very much high on the agenda is to make sure that the president, his team, Ukraine are in the best possible position one day, when they decide so, to start the peace talks.
I think it's a very good opportunity to speak about security guarantees for Ukraine for today and for tomorrow, as you said.
That's why Putin was confident today, because he knows that he is winning. He got very excited about Russia's new ballistic missile, the Orishnik. Moscow fired this missile at Ukraine last month, but the West was not impressed. They doubted the capabilities of Putin's new weapon, so Putin threw down the gauntlet. He wants a missile duel, the Orishnik versus US air defenses.
If those Western experts you mentioned think that Orishnik can be shot down, we propose them and those in the West and the United States, who pay them for their analysis, to conduct some kind of technological experiment, a high-tech duel of the 21st century. Let them name some object, let's say, in Kiev, concentrate all their air defense and missile defense forces there, and we will hit it with Orishnik and see what happens. We are ready for such an experiment. Is the other side ready?
Clearly, the swagger is back. But on some issues, Putin was on the back foot, like Syria. Putin's decision to help Assad in 2015 was a masterstroke. It gave him a major foothold in West Asia. But that gamble unraveled this month. Assad was forced to flee as the rebels captured Damascus. It was clearly a big setback for Putin, but the Russian president refused to accept it.
You, well, those who pay your salaries, would like to present everything that is happening in Syria as some kind of failure, a defeat for Russia. I assure you, it is not true, and I'll tell you why. We came to Syria 10 years ago so that a terrorist enclave would not be created there like what we have seen in some other countries like in, let's say, Afghanistan. Overall, we have achieved our goals.
Putin said he has not met Assad yet, but he does plan to at some point. Another issue was the economy. There are thousands of sanctions on Russia. Yet their economy has survived. It grew by 3.6% in the last financial year. Next year, it is projected to grow by 3.9%, much higher than Western nations. A big reason for that is Russia's relations in Asia. Putin was all praise for his Asian partners. He said that he shared a warm relationship with Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi. India and China have been buying Russian oil, which is why Russia's economy is still thriving. But Putin did admit that inflation is a problem.
There are some issues here, namely the inflation, a certain overheating of the economy, and the government and the central bank are already tasked with bringing these rates down.
None of this is big news, really. It's all along expected lines. But then again, news is not the objective here. This press conference is all about projecting power. Just look at the setting. A big horseshoe table, journalists seated on three sides, and lights all around. At the center of this spectacle is Vladimir Putin. He doesn't just invite Russian media, journalists from nearly 80 countries are present. They're all given colorful placards. You're supposed to wave these frantically until you catch Putin's attention. And then you get to ask him a question. If you're a Western journalist, you get a reply wrapped in an insult. Like I said, this is a power move. In the past, this news conference was focused on domestic issues. Russians would call in with major or minor complaints, like a road that needs repair or rising prices of grocery. Some callers were downright weird. They would ask Putin where he sleeps and whether he likes dogs or cats. These questions were intended to soften the edges, to make Putin seem like a lovable leader. But nowadays, the focus is on foreign policy, especially after the war in Ukraine. I guess, choreographed or not, one thing is clear. This press conference is a window to Putin's mind. It tells you about his intentions, his mood, and his thoughts on the past year. A bit like Putin's very own Spotify Wrapped. In West Asia, tensions are flaring up again, this time between Israel and the Houthis. On Thursday, Israeli strikes hit Yemen. The target was the capital of Yemen, the city of Sana'a, and the port city of Hodeidah. The strikes targeted power infrastructure and oil facilities. 9 people were killed, 3 others were injured. Israel has called this operation successful and said that these were targeted strikes.
The IDF conducted precise strikes on Houthi military targets in Yemen, including ports and energy infrastructures in Sana'a, which the Houthis have been using in ways that effectively contributed to their military actions. Israel will not hesitate to act in order to defend itself and its citizens from the Houthis' attacks.
Videos from Sana'a show the impact of the attacks. Power stations on fire, damaged silos, leaks from the plants, and firefighters trying to control the damage. The attack was in response to a Houthi strike. Early on Thursday, the Israeli army intercepted a missile coming from Yemen. The target was central Israel, where a school was damaged. No one was injured, though. Now, Israel is citing this as the reason to attack Yemen.
The missile force of the Yemeni armed forces carried out a significant military operation, targeting 2 vital and sensitive military targets of the Israeli enemy in the occupied Jaffa area using 2 Palestine II hypersonic ballistic missiles. The operation achieved its goals successfully, by the grace of Allah.
So the Houthis strike Israel, and the Israeli army hits back, and it triggers a series of tit-for-tat attacks. But why Yemen? Because Yemen is home to the Houthis. This is an armed group, much like Hamas in Gaza or Hezbollah in Lebanon, and all 3 of these groups are allied. They're all backed by Israel's greatest enemy, Iran. And these armed groups, Hamas, Hezbollah, and Houthis, are together known as the Axis of Resistance. After October 7, the Houthis threw in their lot with Hamas. They began fighting a proxy war against Israel. The first target was the Red Sea. The Houthis would attack any ship that they thought was linked to Israel. The attack started last November and disrupted global shipping. Then the Houthis changed tack. They started attacking Israel directly. They struck buildings in Tel Aviv. Of course, Israel could not have that. They were fighting a war in Gaza. The last thing they needed was attacks from another enemy, so Israel decided to respond. They struck Yemen. It was a message to the Houthis, basically, to stop their attacks. And all of this happened months ago. And since then, the tit-for-tat strikes have been on. Now, let's look at this from Israel's perspective. Their first target was Hamas. So Israel eliminated the top leadership of Hamas. They flattened the Gaza Strip, and they tried to demolish Hamas as a military force. Then they turned to the Hezbollah, kill their leader, Hassan Nasrallah, and hundreds of other Hezbollah fighters with pager attacks. Israel carried out continuous strikes in Lebanon, leaving Hezbollah as a weakened force. So 2 groups out of 3, Hamas and Hezbollah, in the so-called axis of resistance, decimated. The third group, the Houthis, remain a challenge, though, because of multiple reasons. The first reason is the location. Remember, both Gaza and Lebanon are on the border with Israel, but Yemen is far away. So a distant target for Israel. That's the first challenge. The second challenge is the cost of engagement. The Houthis control large parts of Yemen. They have a stronghold to launch new attacks. But Israel may not want a direct military campaign in Yemen. It would stretch their resources. Reason number 3 is global shipping. The Houthis are at a vantage point. Look at this map. Yemen gives them access to crucial routes. The Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden both lead into the Suez Canal. It's the busiest waterway between Asia and Europe. Around 12% of global trade passes via the Red Sea, also 10% of seaborne oil. Any conflict here could derail global shipping supply chains. Ships will have to take a longer route. Insurance covers will go up. And we, the consumers, will have to pay for it. So any conflict in the Red Sea will affect the whole world, which is why Israel is sticking to targeted strikes. The question is, for how much longer? If the Houthi attacks continue, Israel will be forced to escalate, and that may lead to a whole new front in this war, one that could draw in other regional players as well. Whichever way you look at it, it's the opposite of ideal. You wouldn't want to be Iran right now. Your allies are being toppled, your proxies are weak, and your people are struggling to make ends meet. It's a dangerous moment for the Iranian regime, arguably their weakest point yet. Let me tell you about the latest problem, an energy crisis. An energy crisis in Iran. Tens of millions of Iranians are facing power disruptions, that too in the middle of winter. Temperatures in Tehran are close to 0 degrees, so imagine having no power. The government has also shut down certain operations like schools, offices and banks. 13 power stations have also been shut. The idea is to conserve power. On Monday, the shutdowns led to a protest near Tehran. People blocked a main highway near the capital. They also burnt tires on the road. I know this may sound a bit strange to you. Iran has the second largest natural gas reserves in the world. Also the 4th largest crude oil reserves. How can such a country face power shortages? Because the industry is underdeveloped. You see, having reserves is not enough. Those reserves have to be extracted, they have to be processed, and finally they have to be distributed. And that's where Iran struggles. Their power industry is plagued by years of corruption, plus Western sanctions prevent modernization. And the result is this: shortages and blackouts. This has a domino effect on Iran's economy. Industries need power to function. Vehicles need fuel to transport goods. So power shortages drag the economy down. And it's happening at the worst possible time for them. Because Iran's economy is already struggling. Their currency, the rial, has dropped 10% since last month. Look at the exchange rate. $1 equals 777,000 riyals. $1 is equal to 7,77,000 riyals. To put that in context, in 2015, it was just 32,000 riyals. And this was during the nuclear deal talks. Inflation also remains high. It was nearly 50% in May 2023. It has gradually dipped to 37% this year, but still it's way above acceptable levels. Reports also say that 30% of Iranians live in poverty. All of this can be largely traced to one problem, and that is sanctions. You see, Iran cannot sell its oil in the open market. Only a handful of countries buy it. China alone makes up 90% of Iran's oil exports. If the sanctions are lifted, Iran could sell oil to more countries, meaning more money in their coffers. But there's a problem. Iran must pause its nuclear operations for the West to lift sanctions. Basically, Iran must agree to not build a nuclear bomb. In 2015, they did manage to strike such a deal. But then came Donald Trump. First, he pulled out of the nuclear deal, and then he reimposed the sanctions. Now he's back, and chances are that he will pick up where he left off. Unless, of course, Iran agrees to negotiate to give up its nuclear ambitions. That's what Joe Biden wants as well. His Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, has said that it's been a bad year for Iran. He wants the regime to focus on its people.
There's no doubt this has not been a good year for Iran. One choice it could make, and should make, is to focus on itself and focus on trying to build a better, more successful country that delivers for its people, which is clearly what most Iranians want, and to stop getting involved in these adventures or misadventures throughout the region and beyond.
It sounds simple enough. Focus on your people, rebuild the economy, don't pursue the bomb, and the sanctions may be lifted. But here's the problem. Iran's regional position has weakened considerably. In Syria, it has lost an ally in Bashar al-Assad. In Lebanon, its proxy Hezbollah is struggling. In Yemen, the Houthis are under attack. And in Gaza, Hamas has been dismantled. So Iran's regime is pretty vulnerable right now. It has already been attacked twice by Israel. With Trump's encouragement, they could go further. The Israelis, they could go further. So Tehran finds itself in a tough spot. Do they pursue the bomb to protect their regime? Or do they seek sanctions relief to help their people? Both options are fraught with risk. And Iran's supreme leader knows this. He tried to send a defiant message this week. This is what he said.
With the actions taken in Syria and the atrocities committed by the Zionist regime and the US, as well as the support they are receiving from others, they thought the resistance has ended. They are heavily mistaken.
Frankly, Khamenei himself is part of the problem. He's almost 85 years old. Rumors are spreading about his health. Last month, some reports said that he was in a coma. So naturally, there are questions about his succession. Who will take over after him? Khamenei has not picked anyone yet. But his son's name has been doing the rounds. It remains to be seen if the people of Iran will accept him. Because remember, this is not the 1980s anymore. Times have changed. And we saw an example of that in 2022. Iran's morality police picked up a 22-year-old woman, a woman named Masha Amini. What was her fault? She was not wearing her hijab properly. Her death triggered nationwide protests. We saw portraits of the supreme leader being attacked. So clearly, the society is changing. But does the regime realize that? Recently, Iran's parliament passed a new dress code, a new law for the dress code. It called for harsh punishment if women expose their hair, forearms, or legs. Iran's president opposed that law, and this week, they decided to pause its implementation. This tells you about the internal tussle. The hardliners still dominate institutions, including the military and the Revolutionary Guard. But young people in Iran want freedom. and they're not scared to take on the regime. If these two groups clash, anything could happen. The regime may try to avoid that. But as we've seen this year, revolutions can grow out of nothing. And Iran, of all countries, should know that. So Iran is struggling, and Iran's challenges will add to global uncertainty, which is already hurting economies the world over. India is no exception. The Indian economy is also facing headwinds. The stock markets crashed again today, posting losses for the fourth straight day. The Indian rupee hit an all-time low against the US dollar. $1 was worth 85 rupees today, the lowest it has ever been. The markets are reacting to decisions made by the US Fed, the Federal Reserve, that is America's central bank. It has slashed interest rates. This will make loans cheaper in America. Now, usually markets cheer such decisions, but not this time, because this time the Fed's rate cut has come with a warning. Inflation still remains a worry, a big worry. The US central bank says it wants to remain cautious.
We can therefore be more cautious as we consider further adjustments to our policy rate. We know that reducing policy restraint too fast or too much could hinder progress on inflation.
So inflation remains stubborn in the United States. It's a growing concern in India too. The days ahead could be tough. Indian households may feel the pinch because inflation is likely to surge. If you are in India, brace for a price rise. Top FMCG companies are set to increase prices. FMCG stands for fast-moving consumer goods. These are your essential items, things that you need and use on a daily basis, things like sugar, wheat, oil, coffee. Let me show you a report. Take a look at this report on your screens. From tea to edible oil and soap to skincare creams, everything is about to get more expensive. Prices are set to rise between 5 and 20%. It is the steepest increase in 12 months. But why are companies raising prices? Because production costs are rising. It takes more money to make these same products. Raw materials have become more expensive, so companies have to spend more to manufacture the same goods. I'll show some numbers. Prices of coffee and cocoa have jumped by 70%. Wheat flour is up by 40%. Palm oil increased by 30%. When production costs increase, companies are left with little choice. They shift the added cost burden onto the consumer, to you and me. And that's exactly what's happening now. This is bad news for all of us and a setback for the RBI. RBI is the Reserve Bank of India. It's been trying to bring down inflation. Last month, there was some relief. Inflation began to ease last month. In the month of November, it stood at 5.5%. It was a sharp drop from October when inflation was well above 6%. The RBI's target is 4%. So the headline numbers suggest that overall inflation in India is coming down. But when you look at food inflation, it's a completely different story. Food inflation in India remains quite high. In November, it was well over 9%. And now prices are set to go up further. So don't expect immediate relief on this front. And the impact of high inflation is not just limited to households. Inflation affects stock markets too. It can influence investment decisions, especially for long-term investors who make big bets on the stock market. Just think about it. What happens when prices go up? How does it affect you? It puts extra pressure on your finances. Your monthly budget gets stretched. So you cut spending on goods which are not strictly essential. And because your budget is stretched, you also end up saving less. The former RBI chief spoke about this. That's Shaktikanta Das. He stepped down only last month. He said that price stability is crucial for economic growth. When inflation is under control, people have more financial flexibility, they invest more, and this in turn boosts the economy. So stable inflation is the bedrock for sustained growth. This is what Shaktikanta Das said, although towards the end of his tenure, he could not stabilize inflation. Now it is up to his successor to finish the job. Our next story is from China. The Chinese economy is also under pressure, but President Xi Jinping is prioritizing his military. Despite China's economic struggles, he's pushing for nuclear dominance. New details have emerged about China's nuclear program. Beijing now has more than 600 operational nuclear warheads. Last year, China had 500 such warheads, so in 12 months, they've added 100, and they're not done yet. Beijing aims to have more than 1,000 warheads by 2030. Experts say this is the most dramatic military build-up since the Second World War. So what is driving China's nuclear expansion? Our next report has the answers.
In 2021, these satellite images from China's deserts had shocked the world. They revealed how quickly the Chinese were ramping up their nuclear capabilities at 3 locations. Beijing was building at least 250 new long-range missile silos. The message was clear: China's nuclear policy is undergoing a dramatic transformation. Minimum deterrence is no longer enough. China wants to project strength by significantly expanding its nuclear arsenal. 3 years later, alarm bells are ringing once again. The Americans have put together a report. It explores the scale of China's nuclear expansion. The findings are alarming. As of May this year, China had over 600 operational nuclear warheads by 2030. This number could grow to at least 1,000. What's driving this buildup? One possible reason could be Taiwan. Xi Jinping has asked his military to be war-ready by 2027. More advanced capabilities, especially on the nuclear front, would bring the PLA closer to this goal. Despite the expansion, China's arsenal is modest. Both Russia and the US have over 5,000 nuclear warheads each. China's goal to secure 1,000 nukes may seem small in comparison, but it is still significant. Beijing is trying to achieve some clear objectives. It wants more powerful weapons which can strike a wide range of targets. It also wants weapon systems which enable multiple rounds of counterstrikes. How does Beijing defend this buildup? China says it is securing more nukes for self-defense. Chinese officials say they will still adhere to a no first-use nuclear policy. But the Americans remain wary. Even though the US still holds the upper hand. While China's buildup is alarming, it is progressing at an uneven pace. Recent shakeups in the PLA are a sign of this. Since last year, at least 15 top officials have been removed for corruption. Going by one assessment, every branch of the PLA is affected by this wave of purges, including the top brass. In June, former Defense Minister Li Shangfu and his predecessor Wei Fenghui were expelled from the Communist Party. Both military leaders were labeled corrupt. Last month, another top official, Miao Hua, was suspended and placed under investigation. Again, over corruption allegations. Some of these cases involved China's rocket force. This the same wing of the PLA tasked with manning China's nuclear missiles. The purge of military officials may not be over just yet, but this is, at best, a temporary setback. China's nuclear build is real and a serious security challenge. It could easily spark a new weapons race among the world's most powerful nations.
Napoleon said, "Never interrupt your enemy when he's making a mistake." But what if that mistake is too funny to ignore? That's our dilemma right now, because Gurpatwant Singh Pannu has released another video. And once again, he is targeting Russia. And once again, it's a gem. Pannu says Putin is helping India target Khalistanis. He also says Russia was involved in the killing of Hardeep Singh Nijjar. Listen to this.
Against pro-Khalistan Sikhs is a death knell for Russia. In the light of newly discovered information, in May 2023, Russians hacked Shahid Nijjar's Telegram account and provided this information to the Indian agents, resulting in the assassination of Shahid Nijjar on June 18. Simultaneously, Russians hacked my Telegram account and gave this information to the law officials.
Did you hear that gong sound at the start? Guess where it came from? The entrance music of The Undertaker from WWE. I'm not making this up. You can check it later on YouTube. But stolen BGM aside, what Pannu said is dangerous. He's offering $25,000 for a tip-off. On what? On the whereabouts of 2 diplomats. One is India's ambassador to the US, Vinay Quatra, and the second is Russia's ambassador to Canada, Oleg Stepanov. Pannu wants to know about their public engagements. Now, there are 2 things to note here. One, the big money being offered. This is almost 21 lakh Indian rupees for a tip-off. And 2, the whole idea of tracking a diplomat. It is problematic. It's a veiled threat to their security and safety. But I guess this is Pannu's new strategy, to drag Russia into his bogus conspiracy theory. Just one word of caution though, maybe avoid tall buildings and balconies. Russia has condemned these statements by Pannu. They're also taking this issue up with Canada. Last week, in fact, Russia's mission in Toronto was targeted by Khalistanis, and now they want to track the Russian envoy. Moscow says this is equivalent to plotting a terror attack. So they are demanding more security, but don't expect Justin Trudeau to help out. The true scale of his support to Khalistan is just becoming evident. We have some new information from Canada. It shows an increase in asylum claims of Khalistan sympathizers. Since the pandemic, these claims have shot up. Now look at the numbers. In 2020, just 28 Khalistan sympathizers sought asylum in Canada. In 2021, the number went up to 144, and in 2023 to 620. This coincided with a big change in Canadian politics. In the 2021 election, Trudeau could not secure a majority. He needed help from the NDP, the New Democrat Party. It is led by pro-Khalistan leader Jagmeet Singh. After this alliance, the asylum numbers shot up in Canada. Is that a coincidence or a policy change? Only Prime Minister Trudeau can answer. And just to be clear, there is no active separatist movement in Punjab. That's all in the past. So I'm not sure what these asylum seekers are fleeing really. Just looking for a free ride, I guess. But either way, the Trudeau-Jagmeet alliance is now over. Jagmeet Singh has abandoned Justin Trudeau's sinking ship. Even his own MPs are going against him. Last week, Trudeau's Deputy Prime Minister resigned in protest. This week, 15 of his party MPs asked him to step down. Yet, the Prime Minister is marching on. His strategy is to ignore the problem. Reports say Trudeau had a number of year-end press events lined up. A lot of them have now been cancelled. If elections were to be held today, Trudeau would be trounced. His party is at 21% support. The opposition Conservatives are at 43%. They are in a hurry to hold elections. The Conservatives pushed 3 no-confidence votes against Trudeau, but all of them failed. Do you know why? Because other parties, including the NDP, opposed it. They wanted to keep the Conservatives out. But on Monday, Jagmeet Singh changed his tune. He finally asked Justin Trudeau to step down. So chances are the next no-confidence vote may succeed. And when is that? Most likely in late January. The Canadian Parliament has adjourned for holidays, so there is temporary respite for Trudeau. It's really a question of how he wants to go. Does he want a quick exit, or does he want to drag it out? Whatever he chooses, one thing is certain: Justin Trudeau will not be Prime Minister beyond 2025. Moving on to the United States, which is also not acting against Khalistanis, but they have imposed sanctions on 4 Pakistani entities. This includes a state-owned defense agency. And what are these sanctions for? Pakistan's long-range ballistic missile program. All sanctioned entities were associated with this missile program. The US wants to stop it, hence the sanctions, which makes you wonder, the US has been a key provider of weapons and military aid to Pakistan for years. Why do they have a problem with their missile program? The thing is, they don't. These sanctions have less to do with the ballistic missiles and more to do with China. Pakistan's deepening relationship with China. Washington does not like it, so it is applying pressure. They've done it before. Our next report tells you what happened after that.
The United States has imposed sanctions on 4 Pakistani entities, including the National Development Complex, or NDC. This is Pakistan's state-owned flagship aerospace and defense agency. What are the charges? Contributing to Pakistan's long-range ballistic missile program. The announcement was made by the US State Department. The targeted entities include the National Development Complex in Islamabad, Akhtar & Sons Private Limited, Affiliates International, and Rockside Enterprise. All of these companies are based in Karachi. But why are these sanctions happening now? According to US officials, these entities worked together to advance Pakistan's ballistic missile program. In a post on X, State Department spokesperson Matthew Miller said, and I quote, "The United States is designating 4 entities that are contributing to Pakistan's ballistic missile program. We have been clear and consistent about our concerns, and we will continue to engage constructively with Pakistan on these issues." The United States says the NDC worked to acquire items to further Pakistan's long-range ballistic missile program. The other 3 companies worked to supply equipment. Washington has raised concerns about this. The United States sees these procurement activities as a global threat, which is why it's sanctioning these entities. The measures include freezing US-based assets of these entities and banning Americans from doing business with them. Pakistan has now responded to these sanctions. Islamabad called the move unfortunate and biased. A statement from Pakistan's foreign ministry warned that these actions would harm regional stability and accentuate military asymmetries. Pakistan conducted its first nuclear test in 1998. Currently, it has around 170 warheads. The NDC is responsible for the development of its ballistic missile program, which include the Shaheen missiles. These missiles are nuclear capable. Islamabad has also refused to sign the Non-Proliferation Treaty, which aims to prevent the spread of nuclear weapons. The US says it's acting against proliferation, but there's a large geopolitical context here, and that is Pakistan's growing ties with China. This is an alliance that has been a long-standing concern for the United States. These sanctions may be a means to apply pressure on Islamabad, particularly as Washington seeks to contain Chinese influence in the region. And this isn't the first time the US has taken actions like this. In 2023, Washington sanctioned 3 China-based companies, accusing them of supplying missile-capable items to Pakistan. The question remains, how will Pakistan respond? Will the sanctions slow down Islamabad's missile program, or will it be business as usual? Pakistan and the United States were once all-weather friends. In fact, Islamabad remains a major non-NATO ally. But as Pakistan chooses its big brother China over its old BFF, it looks like the US may not be taking it too well. The sanctions may be a start, but it could become a major flashpoint in the ever-evolving US-Pakistan relationship.
In today's world, apparently being a financial expert doesn't take much. You don't need degrees, you don't need years of experience, you don't need credibility. All you need is a social media profile and a good camera, maybe even some flashy graphics, and then you can be a financial influencer, or finfluencer as they're called. You'll find them everywhere. On Instagram, YouTube and TikTok, some of them have millions of followers. They share their stock picks. They talk about investment strategies. They make predictions about the market. More importantly, they make it look easy, like making money is a hack. But is it really? Is it that simple? A new report in India looked at this. It looked at stocks that influencers, financial influencers recommended. This was from 2018 to 2022. And here's what it found. 72% of these stocks underperformed. What does that mean? It means that these stocks yielded returns less than the market average. And these were sold as the hot stock picks. This is what the finfluencers promoted. They said, put your money here and you'll make a killing. So a lot of people followed, but it went bust. And these are not isolated cases. This has become like a cycle. Finfluencers predict a huge gain, their followers jump in, but the market follows its own course and the stocks start falling. Take the example of Ravindra Balu Bharti. He is a YouTube finfluencer in India. He has 2 YouTube channels, and beyond that, he and his associates ran an unregistered business. They lured inexperienced investors. They gave them investment advice. They offered trade recommendations. This entire business was illegal. They did not warn the investors of the potential risks. They sold multiple plans to the same client. They also violated rules. So now India's market regulator has jumped in. We're talking about SEBI, the Securities and Exchange Board of India. SEBI has banned Bharti and his company. They've been barred from accessing the securities market. This is until the 4th of April. SEBI has also slapped a fine on them, a fine of 9.5 crore rupees. Again, this is not an isolated case. Multiple finfluencers have faced similar action in India, like PR Sundar, Mohammad Ansari and several others. In fact, SEBI also announced a broader crackdown recently, tweaking regulations for finfluencers and even removing the content of 15,000 unregulated entities. Basically, they want all financial influencers to fall in line because, first of all, what these influencers are doing is not legal. Not everyone is authorized to give formal investment advice, like what stocks should you buy and where you should put your money. Only registered entities can do this. But influencers are not registered. They have no legal right to advise you. Then why do they do it? Because they make money in the process. They get commissions from brokerage firms or referral fees. But most of them don't follow regulations. They are not bound to protect your interest, and you cannot hold them accountable. So even if you lose money, which you most likely will, they'll keep minting millions. That is why the regulators have intervened. They want financial influencers to register themselves. In the meantime, what should you be doing? Should you avoid influencers altogether? Now, we're not saying that all of them are a problem. Some of them may just be educating and informing their viewers, which should not be an issue. But you have to be cautious because it's your money at the end of the day. Remember, no one can predict the market with complete accuracy. So the key is to do your own research. Make sure that you understand the stocks that you're investing in. Look beyond the glitzy reels. Take informed decisions. And remember this rule. If it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. This is an important day for France and for Gisèle Pellicot, a woman who went on from being a victim to a symbol of strength. We've told you about her story before. Her husband, now former husband, drugged and raped her. Not only did he do it himself, he invited dozens of other men to violate her. Since she was drugged, she did not even realize what was happening to her. This went on for more than a decade. Then the husband was picked up in some other case, and during the police investigation, this sordid tale came out. It turned her world upside down. It shocked the world. The case went to court in September this year, and now the trial is over. Dominique Pellicot, the former husband and one of the worst sex offenders in French history, has been given the maximum punishment, 20 years. 50 other accused men have also been found guilty. What does the verdict say? How did Gisèle and her family respond? And can this shocking case change how we talk about sexual violence? Here is a report.
Most of the world did not know what Gisèle Pellicot looked like, but that changed on September 2nd when she opened the doors to a historic trial. Soon, her face dominated the Parisian streets during marches. Posters of her face were pasted on buildings, and the image of Pellicot, standing with her head held high in a courtroom, became a symbol of bravery across the globe. Pellicot is the 72-year-old retired grandmother whose husband, Dominique Pellicot, drugged her, sedated her, raped her, and recruited dozens of other men to violate her, to inflict unimaginable sexual violence on her for over a decade. Her months-long case has stunned France and the world alike. Pellicot, who has since divorced her husband, pushed to make this historic trial of 51 men public. Now the trial is over and the verdicts have been levied. Dominique Pellicot has been given the maximum sentence. He has been sentenced to 20 years in prison. All of his 50 co-defendants have been found guilty as well. The long list includes a nurse, a soldier, a journalist, a prison warden and delivery drivers, aged from 26 to 74. 47 men have been convicted of rape, 2 of attempted rape and 2 of sexual assault. They have received jail terms of between 3 and 15 years. When Gisèle Pellicot left the courtroom, she was greeted with cheers. Thanking her supporters, she said she never regretted making the trial public.
This trial was a very difficult ordeal, and in this moment, my first thoughts are with my 3 children and my grandchildren. It is also for them that I fought this battle. I never regretted this decision to make the trial public. I trust now in our capacity to collectively seize a future in which each one of us, woman and man, may live in harmony with mutual respect and understanding.
Pellico says that the verdict was sufficient, but her children are disappointed by the low sentences. And so are campaigners and supporters.
So we have just learned that Dominique Pellicot got 20 years. We expected it. Since the beginning we thought that this was not enough, but we knew it was the maximum sentence.
While the sentences may have disappointed most of France and the world, there is no denying that the case has sent shockwaves through the country and fueled hope for change.
I don't know if this will change anything in the future. I hope it does, and that in terms of justice, that it will stand as an example.
The strength of one woman that garnered international solidarity has been met with a national reckoning. It has transformed how we discuss sexual violence, how we shift blame to survivors. Even today, more than 100,000 women face sexual violence in France every year. Globally, the number is 1 in every 3 women. Clearly, as Giselle Pellico says, shame must change sides.
Let's talk about the city of 7 hills now, Istanbul. It is Turkey's tourist hotspot, but if you wander its streets, you may see more patients than travelers. And they are unmissable. Young men with gauze on their heads, wandering around with pricked red scalps. Istanbul may be the jewel of the Ottoman Empire, but it also wears the crown of the hair transplant industry, and it has helped Turkey become the hair transplant capital of the world. With an industry worth more than $3 billion every year, thousands of men and their receding, thinning hair are taking a trip to Turkey from all over the world, and their mission is singular: more hair. These men want to get their hairlines back, so much so that this trend has comically renamed the Turkish Airlines Turkish Hairlines. Over the past 5 years, Turkey's hair transplant industry has exploded. To understand why, let's go back a few decades when surgeons would move large groupings of hair from one part of the head to another. This looked so unnatural, it was called doll's hair. Hair restoration has advanced dramatically since then. Now there are 2 types of procedures. First, where a strip of hair is sliced away, then placed where the patient needs growth. Another, where hair follicles are punched out. Both these procedures are more precise, scars are smaller, recovery time is lower, and hair growth is more natural. Now, this method was first developed in Japan in the late 1990s. Around the year 2002, it was first performed in Turkey. 20 years later, this country has an astonishing number of hair loss clinics. There are at least 500 in Istanbul alone, which is about 8 times the global per capita rate. And these clinics are booming. There are many reasons why. First, of course, the early adoption of advanced technology. Second, a good healthcare system with skilled doctors. Third, healthy competition among providers. Fourth, and most importantly, affordability. You see, procedures here cost about $3,000 to $4,000, which is a fraction of the cost in the West. In the UK, for instance, the average cost is $15,000. In the US, $12,000. Same for Europe and Australia. So Turkey is a desirable choice. But a fifth factor makes it even more desirable, and that is luxury. For most takers, a hair transplant in Turkey is code for extreme makeover on a luxury vacation. For a few $1,000s, a limo will pick you up from the airport, followed by transplants in fancy suites, recovery in a luxury resort, and game nights with other men in bandages. Apparently, the new Turkish delight is a boys' night. These luxe hair transplant services make Turkey a hotspot for medical tourism. In the last quarter, more than 1 million people have visited this country for healthcare services, mostly for hair transplants, and most of them are from West Asia, followed by the US and Europe, where the desire to get a hair transplant has jumped, listen to this, 240% over the last decade. But what's behind this sudden obsession with hair? Since when do men care so much? You see, 10% women under 40 have regular hair loss. And that's what we usually talk about. We reserve time, money and judgment for women and their hair loss. But we rarely talk about male balding. When half of men start balding by the time they hit 50, 90% suffer from it during their lifetime, and this is rarely a good feeling even for men. Studies show it leads to stress and low self-esteem. It impairs the quality of life, hurts job prospects, and even brings a sense of shame. And why wouldn't it? There has never been a bald James Bond. Love Island doesn't have a hairless contestant. Our culture is obsessed with youth, with masculinity, and therefore with hair. This is why historically men have put animal blood and lizard tallows in their hair. This is why even today they can cause a gridlock by lining up for a so-called miracle hair oil. This is why hair care is a $100 billion market, and this is exactly why male balding is still stigmatized. No wonder that men are flying to Turkey. They don't just want their hair back, but also their lives. We covered the serious bits of Putin's press conference earlier tonight. He spoke about 4 hours and 30 minutes, 4.5 hours. And that's how much Joe Biden spends at work. But honestly, it's an impressive feat. The Russian president is 72 years old, yet every year he holds these marathon press conferences. On one of these days, the year-end presser may spill over into the new year. That's where things are heading, it seems. But when you speak for 4 hours, it can't be all serious. You have to lighten the mood. Putin has tried to do that over the years. Once he joked about trying to get married. Another time, he claimed to have bear-like strength. So how did Putin lighten the mood this time? Take a look.
I think porn's websites are visited all across the world. It's as easy as ordering, a beefsteak on the internet. There can be bans and prohibitions, but you always have to come up with an alternative. You have to come up with something which is more interesting than a porn site.
The rumors about my death are largely exaggerated.
When everything is calm and tranquil and stable, we're bored.
State channels won't ask it. When do you plan to get married? And to whom?
Okay, let's say I have answered this question, but as a respectable person, I will have to do this at some point, maybe.
Vladimir Vladimirovich, I wanted to treat you with it, but the security did not allow me to bring anything in here.
Sometimes when someone brings me food or drink as a present, they ask me if I will eat and drink it myself or they will check. I say, what do you mean to check?
Now it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story. French President Emmanuel Macron visits cyclone-ravaged Mayotte as residents urge for more aid. Airbus tests a new kit which can transform an aircraft into a firefighting plane. And Santa Claus hopes for a peaceful world in his annual Christmas message. Finally, we're taking you back in history. On this day in 1998, U.S. President Bill Clinton was impeached. He became the second U.S. president to be impeached. This was for trying to cover up his affair with White House intern Monica Lewinsky. He was acquitted in 1999 after a Senate trial. We're leaving you on that note. Thank you for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.
President of the United States, now pending.
And raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear?
It is therefore ordered and adjudged that the said William Jefferson Clinton be and he hereby is acquitted of the charges in the said article.
good fly at the back, continuing flow.
With the wishes, son, if the wishes make them true.
You think it's also safe?